Good evening. Thank you for coming. I hope that you all had something to eat. You know, we have a saying, and I have shared this, they persecuted us, we fought back, and then we ate. So you want to make sure that you participate in our customs. I'm Jackie Schreier. I'm the director of the Jewish Federation, and I welcome you all here. I am also delighted to welcome columnist and social and political commentator Micah Halpern to Fort Wayne. Micah specializes in analyzing world events and evaluating their relevance both in the United States and in Israel. He maintains the Micah Report, which is a daily commentary that offers perspective and insight on important national and international issues. He is a frequent analyst on network television and radio. His voice may be recognized by listeners of talk radio broadcast across America, especially his weekly feature, A Safer World, on USA Radio Network, and his daily 1-minute feature, I've Been Thinking, which is broadcast on Town Square Media Network. He hosts his own weekly show on Shalom TV entitled Thinking Out Loud, and is a frequent guest on CBS, Fox, MSNBC, the Learning Channel, the History Channel, the Discover Channel, the Food Network, and PBS documentaries. Following September 11, 2001, he was the CBS commentator on terror and has appeared on ABC's The View as a guest expert. In addition to being a syndicated columnist and commentator, Micah is also an educator and historian. He lectures frequently on issues related to terror, foreign affairs, Israel and the Middle East, wine history, and popular culture. Micah's columns are widely read on the internet, newspaper, and websites around the world, from Front Page Mag to the American Thinker. As an expert on terrorism, Micah has been invited for consultations in the White House with terror analysts and has addressed conferences sponsored by the Justice Department. He has also contributed religious commentary for CNN and ABC television. His most recent book, Thugs, is a bestseller. He is the author of What You Need to Know About Terror. His essays, published in book form, are entitled Online with Israel, At the Millennium, Insights into Life and Religion. He also conducted a weekly radio program entitled This Week in History for Jerusalem Radio. Micah taught at Yale University, Brandeis University, and the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. He continues to lecture to student groups in the fields of political terror and world terrorism, Middle East dynamics, Jewish history, the Holocaust, Zionism, and Israeli society and politics. For fun, Micah writes a column on kosher wines. He is a native of Annapolis and currently resides in New York City. So please join me in welcoming Micah Halpern.
Thank you, Jackie. Can everyone hear me? Thank you for inviting me here to Fort Wayne. It's my first time. And actually, I got to see the embassy today also. So after Jackie dropped me off at the hotel, she said, you must try to get in. So I wandered across the street, and everything was closed except for the box office. So I went into the box office, and I saw someone important, who looked important at least, and I said who I was, and I said, could you please take me inside? And he said, no. So then I said, I can't come back. He says, come back to the concert tonight at 7. I said, I can't, I'm giving a lecture tonight. He said, so come back tomorrow? I said, no, tomorrow I'm leaving at 7 a.m. And he thought for a second, and he said, come with me. And he took me on a private tour of the embassy. Not only that, they were preparing for an organ concert tonight, and so they were rehearsing. So I not only got a tour, I got a private concert also. So thank you so much. It was really a very special treat. I'm reminded of the story that Henry Kissinger, arguably the greatest diplomat of the 20th century, I said arguably, comes to Jerusalem one day and visits the biblical zoo. Now, the biblical zoo is a zoo just like any other zoo in the world, except in front of every display is a pasuk, a verse from the Tanakh, from the Bible. So, you've got the verse where the animal is actually mentioned in the Bible at the display. It's actually very interesting. So Kissinger's making his way through the Tisch Biblical Zoo. It's sponsored by the Tisch family. And he's curious, and he's making his way, going from animal to animal, from exhibit to exhibit, from cage to cage. And he gets to one cage, and he's totally befuddled. Because in the cage is the lion and the lamb. So Kissinger asked the question, how is it possible that the Navi, the prophet's vision of a better world, of the end of days, is alive and well in the Tisch Biblical Zoo in Jerusalem? I need to know the secret, he says. Because with that secret, I can bring peace to the whole Middle East. I can bring it to the whole world. The Palestinians, the Iranians, ISIS, the Syrians, everyone can come under one big umbrella, under one big tent of peace, if I only knew the secret of this lion and the lamb in the Tisch Biblical Zoo. He also is remembering that he's on retainer to China for $9 million a year. So he's got to give him something every once in a while worthwhile. So he needs that secret. So he says, bring forth the caretaker. The caretaker is a crotchety little old Jerusalemite. He doesn't walk, he shuffles. He comes in and doesn't recognize Kissinger. Already not a good start. Because in Kissinger's mind, he's one of the most famous people in the world. So Kissinger asked the question, I need to know the secret. Tell me the secret of the lion and the lamb. We need to be able to figure this out. This is really essential to the future of the world. Tell me please, the secret of the lion and the lamb. The crotchety little Jerusalemite, the caretaker, looks at Kissinger and says, there's no secret. Every day we bring in a new lamb. So what I want you to try to understand as we begin our discussion tonight is I want, if I could, to try to extend the metaphor. The Middle East is a traditional environment. Everyone in the Middle East is of a traditional environment. And in traditional environments, changes are difficult. It's hard to change. Zebras can't change their stripes. Even if they want to, it's hard. You get my point? Even if you want to do it, it's not easy. And that's part of the tension that's going on in the Middle East. There is traditionalists, and even change within traditional society is actually traditional change. You get my point? It's not like a new country like the United States, which has, relatively speaking, a glimmer of history, a spark of history, a flash of history. Ancient in America is 150 years. In Jerusalem, if you find something 150 years, it's worthless. It means nothing. Come back when it's 1,500 years, add a zero. Okay, it has almost no significance. And even 1,500 years, by the way, not so good. You get my point here. So tradition is filled with the environment. And I'm not just talking about the Jerusalem or Israel side. I'm talking in general about what's happening. So you have to get a sense of perspective in dealing with these issues from the very, very outset. So solutions are not easy to develop, even when you want to have some, even when you would like to develop them. Because there are a lot of factors that are pulling against you. Right? And that's even when you have the desire to do it, by the way. Do you understand? That's even with, I'm not even talking about the people who don't have the desire. Right? I'm talking about people who want to, also have all these other factors within themselves, challenging the issue of change. Because traditional societies change very slowly. Now, that said, the neighborhood of Israel is a very, very dangerous neighborhood. I'm going to give you an example of what happened Erev Pesach, on the eve of Passover, on April 20th, Thursday. Passover, if you remember, Seder night was Friday night, right, remember? So Friday night's the first night. First thing in the morning on Thursday, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu gets on a plane and goes to Russia. He was just there again yesterday. That's for a secretary. Now, the eve of Passover is arguably the busiest day in all of Israel. There's no question about it. Far more busy than Rosh Hashanah, far more busy than the eve of Yom Kippur, far more busy than the eve of Shavuot, far more busy than the eve of Sukkot. Everyone is cleaning on Pesach. And if you're not cleaning, if you're not only cleaning, then you're cleaning and cooking. And then it's entirely possible that you're cleaning, cooking, and packing. Everyone is doing all three of those things together to a greater or lesser extent. It is the most traveled day of the year. There's no question about it. It is an enormously busy day. And Netanyahu has time to go in the morning, go to Russia, have a 3-hour conversation with Putin, and come back later on in the afternoon. He brings with him his military secretary, Brigadier General Toledano, and the head of the Israeli Air Force, General Eshel. And they go off because earlier in the week, a Russian set of MiGs locked onto an Israeli F-16 over Syria. Locked on mean they went as if they were going to shoot. And 2 days before that, which was the week before, there were another 2 examples of Russia and Israel potentially colliding. Now, to Israel's credit, they responded maturely and did not engage in defensive and then offensive maneuvers. It was as if it didn't happen in the skies over Syria. Now, this is important, because Syria is a pretty small place, and there are 14 air forces flying in the skies of Syria. 14, all right? And it's inevitable that shoulders and wings are going to collide. For instance, a Russian plane flew over Turkish airspace, and Turkey shot it down. And in that blaze went the diplomatic relations between Turkey and Russia. And Turkey is now going to suffer for a very long time because of that. Because Turkey, by the way, does not have its own oil resources. And their largest supplier was Russia. And they're going to grind them to a halt, which is very, very important to know. On September, literally 8 months ago, in September, Israel and Russia sat down in Tel Aviv and exchanged encrypted cell phones to make certain that exactly what I described would not happen. But it did. It happened. And Netanyahu didn't have any spare time, even though it was Erev Pesach, the eve of Passover. He needed to get on the plane and sit down with Putin and say, this can't happen again. No, to really hash it out. Now, Putin said that was the first he'd ever heard of it. I don't believe that. All right? I don't believe much of what Putin says. Okay? Now, he's very good. Putin is an enormously capable character. He's enormously capable. And in the Middle East, he has an agenda. And his agenda is to oust the United States in their role in the Middle East. To become the most important, powerful force, non-Middle Eastern force in the Middle East. Which is why they're in Syria. They spent $4 billion building a port in Tarsus. $4 billion. That's an unbelievable amount of money. And there they have situated not just a huge air force, but a tremendous, tremendous intelligence and satellite system. All right? It's all set up, and it is the listening center for them for the entire Middle East. So Putin said, now, what happens? During the meeting, Eshel and Toledano, the 2 generals from Israel, go off with their counterparts in the middle of the meeting, then hash things out that way. In the end, on the plane coming back, Netanyahu said, my purpose in coming here was to make certain that misapprehensions, great word, he said it in English, misapprehensions do not take place. In other words, that we not interpret their actions as one of violence and respond in kind. That they need to clarify all this. This is very, very important. That was, if it was covered at all, it wasn't covered in the English press at all, I don't believe. It was covered, it was unbelievable. It was not covered in the Arabic press at all. It was covered somewhat in the Hebrew press. But the Prime Minister actually had an announcement that was sent out on his website about what happened. But no one covered it, because they didn't think it was important. I think it's hugely important, because it gives you a sense of what's going on in the Middle East itself. Now, interestingly, the United States is outside of this issue. They're not there. Actually, one has to ask why. Where is the United States in all these things? They're wandering around. They're not understanding what's going on. They're at a loss, a serious and significant loss. They're at a loss culturally, and they're at a loss because their objectives and their goals are not in sync with what's going on in the region itself. So if I told you this week, Netanyahu said something which is very interesting. He said that he is in regular communication with leaders in the region. Let's quote. Who are leaders in the region? And then he detailed. We're talking about the Sisi in Egypt, the president of Egypt. We're talking about the king of Jordan. We're talking about the king of Saudi Arabia. We're talking about the emir of Qatar. And we're talking about the head of United Arab Emirates. Now, that's really important, because what's going on is they're talking about big issues. What are the big issues that they're speaking of? ISIS and Iran. And because of the United States philosophy last year, and the deal that took place just after Pesach last year, and even Passover last year, that where the United States brought Iran into the family of nations again, people in the region said enough. And that's actually forcing Israel and their neighbors together. Go figure. Now, a lot of it's not being made public, and the fact that he made a little bit of it public earlier was a big mistake, I think. Certain things are best not said in public, especially when you're dealing with traditional environments that I began with. We're not going to take so kindly to this issue. But it's been let out now. And as a result, we're starting to see some interesting blowback from those comments. But that said, we see also some fascinating questions. Some really great things. Because not only are they dealing with ISIS and Iran, okay, both tremendous threats to everyone in the region, except for the Shiites in the region, right? I'll get to that in a second. They're also dealing with the Palestinian question. And even though this week there was a conference in Paris about the Palestinian-Israeli issue, the Palestinians weren't there, neither was Israel. Now, how can you have a conference on the resolution of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict without having them present? I mean, that's like crazy, right? Values here, like really weird. It's hard to figure this stuff out. There's a synapse in terms of priorities, in terms of import, in terms of value gates. Who targets grandmothers? Doesn't make any sense. I want to end this section. I'll throw it open for questions because I'm very good at times. I want to end this section with humor, if I could. I talked a little bit about Iran, so let me tell this joke about Iran. I'm working on a book on humor as political commentary in the Middle East, so I'm finding all these different kinds of jokes that are germane and essential to these issues. Oh, no, you know what I'll do instead? I'll tell an Arafat joke. We were talking more about the Palestinians, so I'll tell about Arafat. So Arafat was their leader, and in general, everyone thought that everyone supported Arafat within the Palestinian war, but it wasn't true. So the more you get to know them, the more you drink coffee with them, the more you sit, the more Arabic you know, etc., the more you saw internal critique. And this is a joke that they told me about Arafat. Palestinians told about Arafat. So the joke goes that Arafat one day is driving down the road and boom, his car hits a dog in the middle of the street. And he sees a house in the distance with a light. He says that the dog must belong to that house. So he tells his driver, go tell them that what happened to the dog. Just go tell them what happened to the dog. Express my apologies to them. And Arafat's in the back of the car, he's on his cell phone, blah, 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 blah. After a long while, the driver doesn't come back. So Arafat goes out to the house to find out what's going on with his driver. So he finally gets to the house, he peers in through the window, and he sees his driver is in the middle of a party. They've got him up on a chair, they're dancing all around him, they're clapping, they're singing, all kinds of, it's unbelievable. Arafat's totally bewildered. So he knocks on the window, he calls over his driver and he says, "New?" No, that wasn't the joke. He says, "New? What's going on here?" The driver says, "I don't know. I came in, I said, I'm Arafat's driver. The dog is dead." Okay, that was not me. That was the Palestinians told that joke. It was hilariously funny, right? Hilariously funny. Okay, let me take a few questions, if you could, please. When you do stand up to take a question, please don't speechify. Please don't do that. And also, tell me what your name is, where you're from, and if you're not originally from here, how long are you here, and where did you come from before you got here? Okay, that's a lot of answers, but you can handle it. Okay, remember your name, where you're from, and if not from here originally, where you came from before this. No questions? Is this a Jewish group? Yes.
I'm the German guy. Yeah, what are your...
I'll repeat his question.
My name's Proto-Deacon Michael, St. Nicholas Orthodox Church. So how hopeful are you about this new, different Arab people talking to Arab people without the interference from the United States, which I think I understand. The United States has never understood the Middle East. So,
look, I'm not hopeful at all, on the one hand, but I always see the glass is half full. So I'm an optimist. I do not think that this will work, because I think things will break down. I think primarily they'll break down because Bibi the Prime Minister is feeling a little too cocky right now. And that might get the whole situation into more of a problem with regard to that. I think it's a very strong step forward, and the developments of the relationships will continue, but they will continue on the ISIS-Iran level, and not necessarily on the Palestinian level. But again, the prophet Amos has this spectacular line where he says, in Hebrew the expression is, "Lo navi v'lo ben navi." I'm neither a prophet nor the son of a prophet. So I can't predict, even though my name is Micah, who of course was a prophet. That said, I'm neither a prophet nor the son of a prophet. But I can say to you that it's different. And the United States doesn't know how to handle this, because they've been boxed out. They've been boxed out like in a serious way. And no one in the region can afford to go without the United States. I don't mean the peace process, I mean in general. Or the United States and Russia, because Russia's kicked off also, because they have their agenda. You get what's going on. And for the first time ever, the region can say, they're not going to say, you ticked us off by doing this whole thing with Iran. They're not going to say that, but that's understood from above. But they can say, regional answers have not really been tested. Let's try them. That might be very useful. So on the Palestinian side, I don't think there's a lot of hope. But it's certainly more hope than I've ever seen in the last 20 years, because it means that the Arab leadership has a real stake in this. So you'll hear even tomorrow, and the fallout from and the dealings with the Paris conference, you hear people saying, well, Netanyahu wants changes in the original Saudi plan. We're not going to make any changes. Well, things change all the time, right? That original plan was 2002. It's just not the same facts on the ground. You need to adjust. All these things are going to come out. So people are going to bluster a lot. Now, Americans are getting used to bluster. Presidential candidates are filled with bluster. We've got 3 presidential candidates, and they're filled with bluster. I mean, they're saying things that who knows have a sense of reality, if you get my point. And this is the case down here. So they're going afterwards to bluster, and things might come back to some normalcy. I do know for sure that there's a lot of exchange going on the military side, a huge amount going on in the intelligence side, and people fear the region. They fear ISIS and Iran more than anything else. And the United States actually thinks they're winning against ISIS. So I wrote this big piece yesterday, the day before. I said, no, there's a plan B. ISIS has a plan B. The United States doesn't even realize it. They're winning now in Syria because ISIS only left the skeleton team in Syria. They're actually in Yemen and Libya right now. They've re-established themselves elsewhere. I'll admit that recruitment is at an all-time low for ISIS. And as a result, that means that they're going to want to try to build something big, like a terror attack. They're going to want that. They're going to need that. That's how they build recruitment. But, so there's my long answer to your short question. Thank you. Other questions, Mike? Yes. Name and where you're from.
Larry Coulter, grew up down near Muncie, 60 miles south of here. A long time ago, the Pope and Martin Luther sort of agreed to disagree, and that's controlled pretty much Europe and the U.S. And other parts of the world. But from what you just said about the Shiites and Sunnis, they clearly cannot even agree to disagree. But this thing about killing the other guy, is that a contest of power between them, or is that rooted in the Islamic religion and therefore shows up in the power fight?
Well, it's an interesting question, so let me try to repeat it if I could. First is this idea of agreeing to disagree might come about as a result of the Reformation process that we were talking about earlier. And that's a Western phenomenon. So what happens in the pre-Western environment, or an environment that does not have that kind of Reformation? And to kill one another with impunity, or to kill the people you disagree with, is that a power issue, or is that an issue rooted in the tradition? Recognize the word I'm using. I'm using tradition. I did not use the word religion. Remember, I just told you that, right? I'm very consistent to what I'm trying to explain here, in the tradition of Islam. So my answer to you is this. The Reformation changed and transformed and modernized the Western world, and brought Christianity to a level, an interaction, and hence Judaism, the Jews that lived in the Western world there, to a whole different level in understanding the interaction. By the way, there were Jews of Arab lands also. There were Arab Jews, right? There were Jews of Muslim lands too, not just Arab, but Muslims. In other words, Arabs are only those who speak Arabic, right? The largest populated Muslim country is Indonesia, right? Not at all Arab. The Iranians are not Arabs, they're Persians. They're Muslims, but they're not Arabs. You get the point. So Arab is Arabic. But the Islamic tradition is a different story. So my answer to you is this. There is absolutely 100% a traditional aspect of tension where you, in a pre-modern society, when you disagree with someone, you kill them. All right? So the notion of agreeing to disagree doesn't happen in the pre-modern society. It just doesn't. And in pre-modern society, that's pre-Reformation, that's what you have. There's also a power element. So there's no question when ISIS decapitates, when they behead, when they burn people alive, they're doing it for a message. And that's part of the power, it's part of the belief also. But they're also killing Sunnis because they're not believing in the style of ISIS. So this Jordanian pilot that was burned last year, do you remember where he was burned alive? He was killed way before the video came out. He was killed about 10 days before the video. During those 10 days, massive negotiations were taking place. The father of the pilot was saying, he's a Muslim, he's a believing Muslim, he's a Sunni Muslim. He believes just like you believe. It's against Islamic tradition for a Muslim to kill a Muslim who believes. You just can't do that. Well, he was dead already, right? And he was burnt alive already. So how can they justify that? Because if you don't believe the way they believe, what happens? What did I explain? If you don't believe the way, if you disagree, you're justified ultimately in killing them. And that's a very harsh thing. So do you know how they interpret? I watched today, while waiting for the plane in New York to come here, I watched ISIS's message for Ramadan. I told you about introspection and atonement. Their message was go kill Westerners. If you live in the Western world, you can be more effective than even if you joined us here in the Middle East. That was their message. You will be more effective in killing your neighbors, and the message will be greater than if you came to join us in the Middle East. It's a fascinating thing. So we get the point. Is it power? Yes. Is it fear? Yes. Is it tradition? Yes. It's all those things wrapped up into one. And the great use of them is remarkable. The interaction and the use of power and tradition. Yeah. Name?
I'm from Fort Wayne. I was wondering, will the tensions on the Temple Mount itself be affected by this new era of cooperation, or whatever you want to call it? Because the Jordanians have been in charge of it, and then the Palestinians. the last time I was there was around Passover last year, and we went up there, and there was so much just tension because of the way it's being, I mean, we were allowed up there,
Yeah.
but we weren't allowed to do or say anything other than basically walk around, and if there were some Jewish people who were up there, and they were harassed and heckled the whole time they were up there.
Mhm.
So I just wondered, will that be affected by some of these?
Well, here's the question. The question is, will the Temple Mount situation be affected by the change in status or the movement in status of what's going on? The answer is no. The status quo will remain exactly as is. That's why it's called the status quo. And the status quo itself means that the ultimate control of the mountain is Jordanian. The religious control is Palestinian. And Israelis are allowed to visit. They're not allowed to pray on top of the mountain. The physical control, that is the policing of the area, is under Israeli control. Now, that status quo is very, very important. However, when you begin to shake that status quo, people start getting upset. So rumors, at the beginning of this stabbing, in September of this year, a whole series of stabbings and car terrorist attacks, hits, using a car as a weapon, started. Huge amounts of them within Israel and the West Bank. And they all started because rumors were spreading throughout the entire Muslim world that Israel was shaking the foundations of the Temple Mount, which is very, very interesting. That said, it was not true. It was total fiction. But the objective was to try to foment and fuel this rage against Israel, hoping for a new intifada, which was, it continued and continued and continued, and now is dwindling much more seriously over the last month and a half or two. Things have gotten much, much better. So this is my answer. I do not believe that any change will actually happen there, and I don't want it to happen, because status quo is very, very important in that way. Your name, please?
Hi, I'm Kathy. I'm from Ohio and Florida, Fort Wayne. And my question is, what is your opinion on Netanyahu, like, firing the defense minister?
Yeah. So Kathy's question is about Netanyahu's firing of the defense minister and hiring a new one. Now, the beauty of this is that it was totally misunderstood in the Western world again. Of course you believe, right? Let me begin like this. The Israeli government is based on a Knesset, a parliament of 120. In order to be the prime minister, you need 60 plus. The coalition that Netanyahu had was 61, barely hanging on. The addition of Lieberman to that position added another 6, which brings it to 67. Which secures him, which means that 2 other small parties can pull out and he would still remain in terms of conflict. Now, the other element which is important is that when you serve as a minister in the government or a secretary here in the United States, you serve at the will and grace of the president or prime minister. If you disagree with them, your job is to tell them. If you don't accept the leader's, democratically elected leader's response, and you can't deal with it, your job then is to resign. If you can't deal with it, resign. Don't hang on and then write an autobiography afterwards saying how you were right and they were wrong the whole time. Okay? Which is what we see in the United States all the time. All these autobiographies. These guys saying, oh, I wanted to change this and this and this. But if you wanted to do it, do it. If you couldn't do it, then quit. Now, the biggest problem is this. Boogie Ya'alon, the former defense minister, was the chief of staff. Before he was chief of staff, he was also the head, the Tzafon was the head of the Northern Battalion. He was a military man, but then he left the military, had the proper time away from the military, and then joined and became a politician. Politicians are not military. Though he was saying he was military, he was the defense minister. Well, he isn't. He was a politician. Does he understand military? Yes. Okay? But he went to the military leadership and he said to them, and this is the real reason why he had to be fired. He said to them, follow your conscience. Don't follow political leadership. And he wasn't saying about terrible things when terrible things were happening. He was saying to them, that's tantamount to treason. The job of the military is to do what they're told, to exercise it, to respond to the political leadership, to explain the possibilities of what would happen. That's it. But they are not, but unless there's a moral question. I'm not talking about moral questions. Moral questions are these supra questions. I'm not talking about that. Neither was he. All right? You don't have the right to do that. Now, he put in a Victor Lieberman. Who's brash? Oh, I was talking about bluster. Lieberman makes Trump look like a child. This guy is filled with bluster. Okay? And he says a lot of things. But he's also a native Russian speaker. I'll tell you something about Lieberman. When Lieberman was in, after he finished the army, in the elite units in the army, he was finished undergraduate school and then graduate school. As an undergraduate, his job was a security guard in the Prime Minister's office, outside the Prime Minister's office. That was his job. Okay? Now, that's not a lackey position. It was a very, very important position because he had to have specific training in order to be there. He was in the elite unit and everything else. 10 years later, he was secretary of the cabinet. Okay? 10 years later, he was secretary of Netanyahu's cabinet in his first term. Okay? This guy's a really talented guy. I once spoke to him for about an hour and a half just about John Stuart Mills, the concept of power in John Stuart Mills. He said, this guy has real depth, but he's blustered. He's a thug in certain ways also. Okay? That said, he's also a Russian. I just earlier told you about some of the issues regarding Israel and Russia and Putin. Lieberman and Putin speak the same language. I don't mean Russian, I mean
Hungary.
yeah, right, exactly. They understand one another very well. You get my point. They speak the same language, and I don't mean Russian, right? You get my point. So this is my answer to your question. Is the good thing about it? I'll tell you something else. At the same time that he was negotiating with Lieberman, he was negotiating with Herzog to get 24 of their seats in, and that almost got in. That would have been more secure. But had the two of them gotten in together, and you know something else? Today is Monday. On Friday, I got a message that they were still continuing their negotiations with Herzog. That would have brought the number to 91 out of 120. Would have been a wall-to-wall. Now, he still has not. He's so hopeful. He has not taken the foreign ministry. He wants the foreign ministry to go to Herzog and Labour, which would have brought it more to the left. See, it's all about. There are many reasons why you fire a minister. One has to do with power. Others have to do with coalition. Others have to do with mistakes. And some have to do with ego. Politicians are not short on that. Okay. Yes, please.
My name is Gary. I'm born and raised in Indiana. In the aftermath of an attack upon Paris, France by fascist Islamic terrorists, there was a large gathering of people throughout Europe. And one of the European leaders said the attack upon France is not just an attack upon France, but all civilization. Yes. Would you believe that all civilization should be unified in order to crush fascist Islamic terrorism and the threat to the entire world?
Yeah, so the question for those who didn't hear is that after the last set of terror attacks in France, French leadership stood up and Hollande said this is an attack not just against France, but against the entire civilized world. And that the world should unite against these kinds of things. And I think that it is happening, that as the Western world is recognizing, because France is actually on board. France was the one, France, even after Charlie Hebdo, didn't realize that they were targets. It took another, it was January, so in September, it took another 9 months for them to realize that it wasn't a chance happening in Charlie Hebdo, which was devastating, just absolutely devastating. The answer also is this. In order for the West, or in order for anyone to start confronting these issues, Islam has to take responsibility also. That is, the Muslim community has to stand up and say, we don't accept this behavior. We don't accept it. And they have to put that, and that's a big risk. And they haven't taken that risk yet. And the voices that have come out have been marginal voices, not mainstream voices. We want real voices out there. And we want them in America, we want them in Europe, but we also want them in the Middle East. We want them throughout the Islamic world. Because otherwise, their silence is interpreted as agreement. And by being silently agreed, there's actually a Gemara on the whole question. The Talmud actually has this whole discussion about when something happens, if you're silent and you don't say anything, it's as if you voted in favor of it. Okay? When something bad happens. Shtika kehoda'ah is referred to as. And that's an unbelievable idea. So my answer to you is that, yes, I think the Western world needs to come together, but I think the Islamic world has to come together also. And I think we have to help them. They're afraid. They're really afraid. They're afraid that they themselves will be killed. Because what happens when you disagree in the pre-modern world? That's what happens. It's a bad situation. One more question, Jackie. Yes, your name, please?
Yeah, I'm Eldon from Fort Wayne. What steps in the next new administration do you think the U.S. should take, or strategy should it take to be less clueless than what it's been?
Okay, so the question is, what steps should any administration take? Not just the next administration, but every administration. The most important thing is that they have to expose themselves to as many different ideas as possible and get advisors in there that really understand what's going on. Not just have points of view. But say, I'm a political commentator. I'm a thinker. I'm an analyst. My wife does not know for whom I vote. Now, you would think that's sort of weird, right? My mother-in-law could not tolerate that. What? You don't tell your wife who you vote for? What kind of husband are you? What kind of relationship do you have? It's not like we don't talk about things, but my personal opinion is irrelevant. Just ask her. She doesn't care what I think. She doesn't have how I feel about things. She wants my analysis. And you have to get people around you who are giving analysis, not their personal opinion. So you see it all the time. You see it. I'm not surrounded by, I'm often around other columnists like myself. And they're telling me what they want to happen, as opposed to what the possibilities of happenings will emerge. And that's a big difference. So, especially that happens with the presidential election also. Until the conventions of July, we will have almost no clue as to what's going to be happening. All right? That's just reality. Same with regard to this. We need people who understand the environment. There are enough people out there, you bring them in, and you have concentric circles of teams. You get the reports in, and you start talking about it. And so it's not just, this is what we'd like to, the United States really wants things to happen, and they think if they share it and say it enough times, it will happen. I really, really will it. Okay? This is not a dream. In order for it to happen, you have to change things. In order to change things, you have to understand what's going on the ground. If you're not realistic on that, you're not going to achieve anything. So that's number one. So that's so very important. Now, by the way, this is not a Democratic issue. The Republicans were just as clueless. So I was once in the White House, and I said, you do realize that this was a really bad decision, and none of you people here understand it. So one of the guys, the Deputy Chief of Staff, says to me, he says, Halpern, we don't know anything about China either. That was not the answer I wanted. You get my point. It was, what kind of a silly retort was that? But it was true. It was true. So here's what I want to answer to you right now. And I really appreciate you guys coming tonight. And I appreciate you inviting me, I really do. I want to end by saying a few things about Federation in general, because we're really here for Federation. It's the annual meeting. The world is a very dangerous place. But Israel actually makes the world a better place. Not for the Jewish people, by the way. The world. The world is a better place because Israel exists. And Israel's embattled, and lovers of Israel are certainly embattled. And it's important to come together with people who love Israel for that reason also. It's also important to recognize that the Federation itself is that link, not just to Israel, but that link to the Jewish people, that link to create a situation of builders. You see, our enemies want to destroy us. They rip things down. They're very good at destruction. They're really good at destroying things. We are very good at building. We are spectacular builders. And we don't build for today, and we don't build for tomorrow. So when Hamas sends rockets over, it causes damage. When Hezbollah sends rockets over, it causes damage. We rebuild. We, you and me, we rebuild. That's what happens when we build things, right? That's where your contributions go. They're not donations, they're contributions. You were a part of that development, all right? That's very, very important. What happens is very interesting. We build so well, but we don't build for this generation or the next generation. We build for our children's children's children. Because we're a future-oriented society. Because we're optimistic. We really believe in the future. And a beautiful future it is. It's a beautiful future, and Israel is the center of that future. And a lot has to do with your involvement in that. And you should never, ever lose faith in that. You should never lose understanding of that. You should realize the Gemara of the Talmud tells a beautiful wordplay on a line. It says, the Talmud says, Al tikreh banayach, don't read my children, Ella, rather, bonayach, my builders. We are a society of builders. And the future is ahead of us like you'd never believe. And ahead of Israel. And she has done remarkable things in the few years that she's been around. And you should all be very proud of her. I want to end with another piece of humor if I could, and then I'll cut. The story goes something like this. Ahmadinejad comes to Washington one day to meet with the president. And as he comes in, he comes into a meeting and he says, Mr. President, last night I was here and I had a dream. I had a dream that Washington was converted to a Muslim city, the capital of the Islamic world. And the White House became a huge shrine to Islam. And the Capitol building became a humongous mosque to Islam. And the Washington Monument became an obelisk. Well, it is an obelisk. but it was an obelisk to Islam. And so the president said, strokes his chin for a second and said, last night I had a dream too. He says, what was your dream? Ahmadinejad asked, what was your dream? He says, I had a dream that I came to Tehran, Iran, and everywhere I saw posters with writing on it, and placards with writing on it, and banners with writing on it. On every corner there was a flag with banners on it, with writing on it. And across every street there was a huge banner with writing on it. And marching bands were marching with flags with writing on it. So Ahmadinejad asked, what did the writing say? What was written on all the flags, and the banners, and the placards, and the posters? The president says, I don't know. I don't read Hebrew. Thank you very, very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. If you would like to hear from us and hear about future lectures and talks and programs that we have, please sign your name in the back. And again, we thank you all for being here. And please stay around, visit with Micah. He's here for a while, and have some more food. Okay? Thank you very much.